is the earnings. The earnings are critical because they are the thing that replenish capital. They're also the measure of how vibrant the institution is. You can experience periods where that earnings stream goes down or maybe even is a loss, but that can't be done for prolonged periods without impacting capital and some of these other measures. And so it's important that those earnings always be paramount. And as small business people, which most of us are in this room, you'll know that that's everything from making sure that you're not spending too much on the rent to the salaries and all the other components of running a business, and that needs to be a continual update that you're doing. The L of camels is liquidity. And this is an area that is really causing a major problem right now in our economy and in a lot of our businesses. The idea behind that is that you may have assets, but they're illiquid. You can't get your hands on the money. And if you used to be able to borrow and it was $1 million, but it was valued asset, your asset was valued at, and it's now $500,000, the liquidity has gone down dramatically. And there are a lot of things that need to be planned out in each of our institutions or our companies as we look at this time of understanding that that liquidity is going to be paramount, and particularly if you're one that believes this is a protracted depression, maybe even, or recession certainly, then you've got to be able to think of the liquidity issues and how that's going to impact you. And I'd encourage you, for those of you who are customers of the bank, that you spend some time with the loan officer, maybe talk about some of those issues before you get into a position where there's no way that you can deal with them because you're in an emergency situation. So that is a very quick, the S, by the way, of camels is sensitivity to the interest rates. And that's important because we're right now at a very artificial place. We are at essentially, the Fed funds are at 0% to 0.25%, or 25 basis points. That is clearly artificial. And depending on whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, what could happen, and a lot of economists are telling us right now, is we've had this very rapid decline, and you have an incredible amount of money that's coming into the system through these stimulus programs. Plus, through the monetary policy, we have this very low artificial rate. And what will happen if we're not careful is you're going to see those interest rates come up very dramatically. And as they come up, you're going to have maybe even a reaction that's like a W, so that they come up. As it comes up too fast to try to combat inflation, which is what we're going to have as we come out of this, then you're going to see a decline again that could bounce a few times before it starts to really level out. And the things that I'm reading, the economists I'm talking to, can place that anywhere from 2 to 3 years before we get through that cycle. Hopefully that's wrong. Hopefully it's not that long. But I think that the last thing I'd say on this sort of metrics analysis of your business would be to make sure that you're realistic in being able to provide for the long term, and then be flexible enough that if that doesn't happen, you can move more quickly. The other two items that I wanted to talk about were the emotional side of this. You know, this is a tough time for not only us, but for our employees, for our customers, for vendors. All of us are sometimes concerned about where's this going to go and when's it going to end. And I think I heard the analogy of when we're on a plane, they talk about pulling down the oxygen mask and putting that over our face first before we can go on with the children. And that's not because we don't care for the children, but we need to make sure that we're functioning so that we can help the others that we're around. I'm being given a signal that I'm over time, close to over time. But let me just very quickly draw something here. A number of psychologists have mapped this, and it actually, our emotional state kind of goes in this pattern. This end being optimism on both ends, this being euphoria, and this being despair. And there's a number of feelings in between that. Let me just run you through them, because I know when I first heard a psychologist talking about this, I thought, oh, this doesn't apply to me. But it really did apply to me, and it may apply to some of you. So if you take the optimism, what you start getting is you begin to get thrilled and then very optimistic, and then almost what Greenspan described as an irrational exuberance, or this euphoria, where it seems like no matter what you do, you make money, and everything seems right. And that's the most dangerous time to be investing, because we throw caution to the wind, we throw price earnings to the wind, we throw the amounts that we borrow to the wind, because we're just making so much money. And then that turns very rapidly and starts down this roller coaster. And some of those feelings would be that we begin to be concerned about the activity. We get anxiety, we have denial, we get into fear and desperation, panic and capitulation, despondency, and that's where we're down here at despair. And then we start out of this where we're at depression, hope, relief, and we come back to optimism. And I think that that's a pretty good cycle to keep in mind. And as leaders of your organizations, you need to be realistic in where you are on that cycle and where your employees are on that cycle, and what you can do to help them understand it and help them understand that there is an end to it. And you can see that it's interesting that we come back to optimism, which is the level point that we need to be at. Just very quickly on this one other topic, in terms of how our values play into this, communication becomes the key. Most of us have been taught for a number of years about mission statements and values and purposes, and each one of us hopefully developed those long before we got into this cycle that we're in now. Now is the time to really lean on those. I know at the bank that we have that hanging in every branch, and we refer to that as we talk to our employees about how we're going to get through this cycle. And it comes down to our desire and our purpose statement to be a sound financial institution delivering sound and professional financial services to